Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the Business Utility Subcommittee. It is Tuesday, January the 23rd, 2024. It is noon. I'd like to call this meeting to order. Mr. Clerk, can you take the roll, please?
Representative Alexander, Representative Burkhart, Representative Clemens, Representative Freeman, Representative Hale, Representative Holzclaw, Representative Johnson, Representative Marsh, Representative Thompson, Representative Vaughn, Representative Vital, Representative Zachary, Chairman Boyd. We have a quorum.
Thank you, Mr. Clerk. Members, before we get started today, do we have any personal orders? If not, we do have a little bit of housekeeping. Item number 1, which is House Bill 682, the sponsor has requested that that be rolled. That is the third roll, so that will go to the special calendar. And we do have a couple of things to cover today. And since we did have some House rule changes, we're going to go over the rules of this committee real quick. The committee will start at 12 p.m. on Tuesdays. As of now, it's in House hearing room 3 here. Sponsor of a bill must request a roll call vote prior to any vote. That's House Rule 83. Once the chairman has made a ruling, only by a show of 3 committee members' hands may a roll call be requested, and such a request must be made before the next bill is called. The amendment filing deadline is 12 a.m. on Mondays, the day before the amendment is to be heard in committee. It's not the practice of this committee to accept untimely filed amendments. Voice amendments will not be entertained. This is a new rule here, but when presenting a bill or a resolution in committee or subcommittee, the sponsor will be limited to a 5-minute explanation. That's a new House rule that applies here as well. Debate may be limited at the chairman's discretion. Any testimony request to members who bring guests who wish to speak must give an advance notice to committee staff 24 hours before the committee is scheduled to meet. Paper will not be distributed. If anyone wants materials distributed to members, it must be provided to the committee staff electronically, and we will send it out to the members of the committee. It will be on the dashboard as well. Sponsors may calendar a bill 3 times. Once a bill has been calendared 3 times, if it does not pass out of committee, it will be referred to the special calendar to be heard with the final calendar. The motion to adjourn is non-debatable, but can be voted on by the committee members for approval. Members of the committee must be recognized by the chair before speaking. If you make a motion if you vote on previous question or call previous question or make a motion to adjourn, you will have to be recognized. We won't recognize just shouting out motions in this committee. And these policies are waiverable by the chairman at his discretion. Those are the rules of this committee. And members, today we do have ECD with us today, and they're going to give us an update, a presentation on the BEAD dollars, and those are federal dollars that are coming down that are going to be dispersed through ECD for broadband deployment in the state of Tennessee. So members, we're going to go out of session, and I'd like to invite up the members of ECD. And if you would, just don't forget to make sure your microphone is turned on and state your name for the record.
Perfect. Thank you, Chairman. Braden Stover. I'm the Legislative Director for the Department of Economic and Community Development. With me is Taylor Beatty, who is our Broadband Director. Chairman, thank you for the invite to talk to you guys and the committee today. We're really excited about the BEAD funding and the broadband program, and Taylor is our expert here. And so I'll turn it over to her, and then we're happy to take questions.
Absolutely. Thanks, Braden. Again, as Braden said, my name is Taylor Beatty. I'm a broadband director at TNECD. And today I'm going to go over kind of what the BEAD program is, what you can expect in terms of timeline, and kind of what our plan is on deployment. So first of all, just to give you kind of an overview, what is BEAD? What does it stand for? That stands for the Broadband Equity Access and Deployment Program, or the BEAD program. It's part of the bipartisan infrastructure law, and Tennessee is slated to receive $813 million through that program. That is with the objective of getting all the remaining and underserved Tennessee households and businesses served with high-speed internet. There's 2 kind of breakdowns. I mentioned unserved and underserved. For an underserved location, an unserved location, are those lacking broadband at speeds of 25/3 megabits per second, and underserved are those that lack 100/20. So I'll kind of break down today if you have questions about that as well. In terms of administering body, this is dollars from the U.S. Department of Commerce, is NTIA, National Telecommunications and Information Administration. And so what happens is they are working through us through our proposals and applications. They will administer the grant to us at TNECD, and we will administer it out through grant programs to internet service providers to get broadband out to the communities. And so in terms of how that program is going to work, I'll talk a little bit about that today, but kind of the transfer of funding, it being a reimbursable grant program, all of those things that you've seen in the past with our grant program are going to stay the same. Of course, this is federal funding, and so there are some federal regulations that we are not able to get around, but we'll be able to answer any questions that you all have about those as well. So anticipated timeline, we submitted our initial proposal back in December to NTIA. What that is kind of how are we going to run this funding to get all Tennesseans served with high-speed internet that are currently lacking internet at speeds of 100/20. How are we going to use that $813 million to do so? We have, once our initial proposal is approved, we will begin our challenge process, and that we anticipate to be around the March timeline. You'll see there's an asterisk there because we're still kind of in the hurry up and wait on what the federal government's timeline is. But I'll talk in just a minute on what the challenge process is and what that looks like. And then after that, we'll be doing the program outreach, talk through releasing eligibility maps. And then we anticipate late summer, August timeframe for the application to open for internet service providers. And then once, backing up just a little, once our initial proposal is approved, we have 365 days to come back and submit a final proposal to NTIA, and that is our list of awards. So we anticipate, based on the federal timeline, to submit our list of awards back to the federal government in March of 2025, and then they will have a build-out timeline of spring 2028 to get all of those projects complete. So going on into kind of what is the challenge process, TNECD is going to open a challenge process. This will be using the required data that the BEAD program requires us to use, which is the FCC broadband data collection map, also can be called FCC eligibility map, FCC fabric. This is a map that the federal government put together, which has all serviceable locations around the country and American territories. So we'll be just looking at the Tennessee part of this map. And what that is any location that is serviceable. So if it's a household or a business that's serviceable, it'll be on that map. The FCC eligibility map will show where those serviceable locations lack internet at speeds of 100/20 and 25/3. So we will open a state-run challenge process that allows internet service providers, local governments, and nonprofits, per the federal guidelines, to be able to challenge those FCC maps. What that is an ISP or a local government can say, hey, we know this household says on the map that it's served. We know it's not served. Here's some information that shows that it's not served. Or it could be an ISP saying, hey, we actually do serve this. Here's the information showing that it is served, so that we can count that as served on our map and remove it for eligibility. So we will go through at TNECD to adjudicate all of those challenges that we get in order to make the eligibility maps. And so we will be making those eligibility maps per county. I'll talk about in just a second why that is. But that will show all eligible locations. So in the past, if you've seen our program, we have focused highly on grant areas. We're moving to a location-based approach. Think addresses. So households, business, actual locations that are serviceable by internet. TNECD is going to divide each county in the state in up to 1 to 3 application areas so that we can ensure that all no Tennesseans are left off of that map, and that we find a way to incentivize a broadband provider to come to every single unserved and or underserved household. This is something that we did in our most recent round of grant funding. It was very successful. I'm happy to answer questions about what if you don't get an application in that area, or what are kind of the parameters around that if you have further questions. But these application areas will actually be posted for public comment so that folks in the community, local governments, ISPs, nonprofits, local leaders such as yourself can look at those and comment on where those grant boundaries are. But we will take things into consideration like geographic issues. If there's a river that goes through, we want to make sure that we incorporate that into the map in a way that doesn't require that provider to build across a river if they don't have to, and they can apply for one of those other areas. TNECD will also open that grant window with all the areas at the same time. So unlike previous rounds of funding, this does not do anything to prioritize one county or community over another. All of these application areas will be open at the same time. We have mechanisms in place to have multiple rounds if need be to make sure that we get all of these application areas served within the allotted time frame. And as I mentioned, all unserved and underserved households will be accounted for upon submission of that final proposal, which is our award list that we'll be sending out. So that kind of goes over what, our plan is over the next little bit. As I mentioned, we will be kind of gearing up for the challenge process in the next couple months. We're waiting on getting feedback on all the provisions of Volume 2. So we'll be working through those, and that, of course, will affect our timeline and that 365-day shot clock to get started on the application process and making awards. But that kind of shows a snapshot of where we are, what BEAD is, and we are happy to answer any questions that you have. Braden, did you have anything for me? Okay, he said no.
Thank you, Taylor. Thank you, Braden. Members, y'all have any questions? Speaker Marsh, you recognize.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And I know there was talk last year about if you award a grant, or if you've got 2 people looking at the area, and one of the providers can do it at less cost, or they can do a bigger territory for the same cost. What is your attitude toward that?
Yeah, great question, Representative. That is actually taken into consideration in our rubric. It always has been taken into our consideration, but this year or this round, the federal guidelines require us to take in minimum BEAD outlay as a key criteria. And so we will look at both cost per passing, match that they can contribute, and those that can do the project for less per passing and contribute larger matches will be prioritized in this program.
Speaker Marsh.
Thank you. And I have another one that I want to ask you about. What's the current status of the capital projects fund?
Yeah, great question.
And when is anticipated timeline of that going to happen?
Absolutely. And thank you for the question. So the Capital Projects Fund is our most recent round of American Rescue Plan funding. That we're on track to make announcements in the next month or so for that program. And so we're finalizing scoring for the last mile and the middle mile program, and plan to make announcements in early March at the latest is our anticipated timeline. Yep,
Speaker Marsh, anything else? Okay. Chairman Zachary, recognize.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good afternoon, guys. So question related to the $813 million without the slide up, was that right? A couple of years ago when ECD testified, there was conversation around if we get 400 to $500 million, that knocks this out. We stop the discussion. This will address the issue. Is that still the expectation?
Our expectation is that we will use probably, I would say, at least $600 to $700 million of this funding. Any additional funding that we have can be used for non-deployment for broadband adoption and affordability programs.
Couple
Chairman
more, Mr.
Zachary.
Chairman. Thank you. So is it the expectation that $600 million will address our unserved and underserved issue for broadband from Memphis to Mountain City?
That is the hope based on the latest data from the federal government and what they have a tool that shares with us what the industry cost per passing is. That's what our hope is. I will say, with the caveat, market conditions, supply chain, that could change in the next couple months. But that's our hope today.
Chairman Zachary.
Thank you. So in your first slide, you do make a differentiation between unserved and underserved, which is good, and the unserved being anything below 25 meg. What is the priority that's going to be given to unserved areas versus underserved? Because again, we're still dealing with situations. My area is a perfect example in Knox County, where we have LCUB getting ready to offer expansion of services. And they're going to be offering in my neighborhood, where I already have access to Comcast, TDS, and others. So in order to maximize these dollars and ensure that we are addressing those who have no access, what priorities are being given? And I don't mean to harp on the words, but you use the word hope. Hope is not a strategy. So what specific plans do we have in place to address the unserved areas and making sure those have priority versus providing hundreds of millions of dollars to entities that are simply going to expand and increase capacity in areas that may have 75 versus areas literally in my district in Knox County that have no access to broadband now?
Great question. So the federal guidelines require us to prioritize 25/3 before we get to 100/20. However, we can do that simultaneously. And so we feel that our strategy does that by identifying all of those households and businesses that lack the 100/20 to do builds that make sense and are cost effective in those communities, instead of just breaking out the 25/3 when you might have some homes or some businesses included in a larger grant area that lack 25/3 along the lines of a same road that has 100/20. And so to make it as cost effective as possible, we plan to do those at the same time. All of it would be built out at the same time. And so our goal, our priority, our requirement from the federal government is that we have to serve everything that lacks 100/20 and prioritize that all at the same time.
So
Chairman
one more,
Zachary.
Mr. Chairman, one more. So if you've got carriers or providers that provide, I just want to make sure I understand, that provide services to an area, and right now that particular area is just say getting 75 and 10. And then you've got areas within that, say within that same county, that have nothing. What are there ways to prioritize ensuring that those areas that have nothing are addressed by these providers before they go in and increase capacity in areas where there's current broadband? Because the easiest thing for them to do is go into those areas, increase capacity, and go from 75 to 500, which is great for those people. But we've still got this group. And my biggest concern, I've expressed this to Commissioner, because we've had this discussion for years, ever since I've been here, is we have all this money, we have this opportunity, but then we're going to be 2 years down the road, and we're still going to have these pockets throughout the state where there's no internet access, none. And again, 75 is better than nothing. So I'm still not hearing to where I understand part of this is federal. I got it. But what are we doing to ensure that those in our communities, and again, I've got them in West Knox County, very small pocket, it's about 80 homes that don't have access. What are we ensuring? What steps are we ensuring that the providers will take the steps with these resources to provide services to those unserved areas?
Yep, that's something that we will be asking within our application process. How do they plan to prioritize those areas that lack 25/3 first? Of course, with that being a part of, bead outlay, with affordability, with all of these other components where that's tied in. That's something that, if they propose to get to those that lack 25.3 first, that's something where they would score higher on that application. So that's something that we are prioritizing.
And can you make sure that information that it's consistently communicated with us and back through the chairman's office?
Sure.
Okay.
Absolutely.
Thanks, guys.
Chairman Clemens, recognize.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I have a few questions here. So it's my understanding that the state missed the deadline to file a challenge to the broadband map. Is that correct?
No, we actually went through a process where we encouraged providers to report the data directly to the FCC.
So what's the benefit of, if any, of allowing the providers to challenge versus the state and having a state-led process?
So do you mean the upcoming state-led process, the upcoming challenge process?
Yeah, but one deadline has passed, correct? To
So
challenge
there was one deadline in January of 2023. So it's been over a year now since that one passed. We took a look at the maps and they matched the data that we currently had. So we encouraged providers to update anything. We didn't have an open grant window at the time, and so our data had not changed. So we encourage providers and communities to report any data there. Now, the upcoming challenge process gives us a chance for the state to be in charge of what that challenge process looks like, what kind of us owning that platform and owning the data collection piece of it. And so we thought this is both a requirement of the program, but it also gives us a chance on the state level to ensure that we're doing this right versus handing it off to the federal government to do it on their own.
Chairman Clemens.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And so you left it up to the providers and the consumers to report. But I mean, if the consumers don't have internet access, how are they going to report?
The consumers would not have reported the last time. Typically, it was just the internet service providers that were reporting their data on where they serve. We have since updated our data through our programs. We had a challenge process for our last program where we're going to be updating that data in what we use for this upcoming challenge process. But this is something that the priority is for the ISPs, local governments, and nonprofits to participate in per the federal guidelines.
Chairman Clemens.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So you said that based on the state's data, y'all didn't file anything before the January 23 deadline. How old was the data at that time?
Was the data from our data
On
would
which
have been
you- on
from
which you relied?
from the previous fall when we did our last data collection.
Chairman Clemens.
Yeah, let me go through here. I think Chairman Zachary asked some of my questions. So regarding the lack of an operational expenditure study, if providers don't apply for the funds or assistance because it's cost prohibitive after their initial influx of grant dollars to build it, what happens?
What happens to the grant areas if no one applies?
Well, the build out and this goal of getting everybody access and on the system.
So if there's nobody that applies in an area, we have a mechanism. We're happy to walk through it with you one-on-one about what that looks like, specifically in our initial proposal. But there's certain criteria we can change. We can lessen our threshold if it's an extremely high cost area, or excuse me, a high cost area. We can offer up to no match. There's different mechanisms that the federal guidelines allow us to do to incentivize providers to apply. Now, if none of those work, then we can also explore other options like, depending on the federal guidelines for that area, the match, the cost per passing, changing some of those guidelines that the federal government will allow us to do to be able to get those served.
Chairman Clemens.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just a couple more questions. So are we incentivizing or promoting, I think to my colleague's point earlier, the use of future-proof fiber technology to serve these areas as opposed to lower quality and stuff that will become outdated pretty quickly?
That's correct. The federal guidelines have a fiber preference. So anywhere that we can get a fiber provider to build to, we will build fiber. The only option for a non-fiber deployment is if we feel at the state level that it does not make feasible financial sense to be able to build there with fiber. We don't expect that to be anywhere in our state. But in the event that there is the federal government has identified several high cost areas. There's about 6 census blocks in the state that they believe are high cost and that we should consider fiber alternatives. We still plan to build fiber there. But in the event that we don't get fiber applications for it, we can then consider other technologies or lower the match or require no match to see what we can do to get those areas served.
Chairman Clemens.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And it's my understanding the department thus far, and correct me if I'm wrong, has refused to meet with the Communication Workers of America. I know that there are high labor standards and protections recommended by the Biden administration in this program tied with ARP funds. What is the reason for that, if that is accurate? And what are y'all doing to ensure labor standards and high road labor protections?
That is actually incorrect. We meet with them about once a month. But all that to say, we are meeting all federal guidelines to make sure that we're engaging with CWA and labor unions in what ways meet those federal guidelines. In addition, they have seen and reviewed, provided public comment on both of our proposals, and we're happy to meet with them if they have any questions.
Members, any more questions for ECD? Taylor, I had a list of things here, but they slowly got answered as we went around. The one question I would have is, will we know in 2025 after the application process, we'll know pretty quickly whether there are still some unserved areas or some areas that no applications were made. So we'll know that by
Yes.
mid-year 25. Is that right?
That's correct.
Okay.
But we're not going to do that.
I know, absolutely. Members, last chance to ask ECD a question. If not, members, we're going. Thank you, Taylor. Thank you, Braden. Appreciate y'all coming out. And members, we are back in session. And before we adjourn, I did forget to tell you, members, that we do have a new research analyst. His name is Jackson Stubblefield, and he's right here to my right. And if you have any questions or need anything from the committee, he's our guy. And I appreciate you guys. And without objection, this meeting is adjourned.